To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, as retold by Jen Sanders, Beth Sampson, and the teachers of the Newton Public Schools. The setting is Macomb, Alabama in the 1930s. The narrator is Jean Louise Scout Finch. Chapter 1. When my brother Jim was almost 13, he broke his arm badly. Even though it healed, we always talked about what really caused the accident. I said the Yules, but he said Dill and Boo Radley started it. But then he said if our ancestors, the Finches, had never moved to Alabama, then none of this would have happened, and the rest is history. We're Southerners. We think it's a big deal who your family is, where you've come from, and what you're known for. Our ancestor, Simon Finch, was a stingy and religious man. He saved up all his money to buy up Finch's Landing, and for generations, that's where our family has lived. My Aunt Alexandra still lives here now with her quiet husband. My father, Atticus Finch, went to Montgomery, Alabama to study law, and his brother Jack went to Boston to study to be a doctor. My father moved back to Macomb once he finished law school. Macomb was a tired old town back in those days. People moved slowly, ambling across the town square. Days seemed long, especially on hot summer days. People didn't hurry because there was nowhere to go, nothing to buy, no money to buy it with, and nothing to see. We lived on the main street, Atticus, Jim, and I. Our father played with us, read to us, and treated us fine. He had a cook, too, Calpurnia. She was strict with me. She always asked me why I didn't behave as well as Jim, but he was older anyhow. She always won our battles. My father always took her side. Our mother died of a heart attack when I was 2, so I didn't remember her. Jim seemed to miss her, though. One day during the summer when I was 6 and Jim was 9, we were playing in our neighborhood as usual. We heard something in Miss Rachel's garden. We found a boy sitting looking at us. He said, "I'm Charles Baker Harris. I can read." "So what?" I said. Jim wanted to get a better look at him, so he said, "Why don't you come over, Charles Baker Harris?" "Folks call me Dill," he said, struggling to fit under the fence. Dill told us he was from Mississippi, but was spending the summer with his Aunt Rachel. He had seen a bunch of movies, so he described them to us, and we spent the next days acting them out. He was very creative and always had good ideas. We eventually got tired of recreating Dracula and other stories. That's when Dill's fascination with the Radley house began. The Radley house had sagging shingles and a drooping porch. The grass was too high, and the paint had turned gray and dingy. Even in the long, hot summer, the doors were shut up tight. There was a rumor that it was haunted. People said Boo Radley went out at night and peeped in people's windows, that he breathed on flowers and they froze instantly. They said he committed little crimes in the night, but no one ever saw him. The history of the story is that Arthur, Boo, got into a bad crowd in high school. They swore, fought, and got into real trouble when they were locked a court officer in the outhouse. Boo's father was so strict that the judge let him take Boo home, and no one had seen him since. Years later, the story goes, Boo was making a scrapbook out of articles from the Macomb Tribune when he stabbed his father with a pair of scissors and kept right on cutting. Mr. Radley was not a nice man. He went to town each day but never spoke to us, even if we said, "Good morning, sir." When he died, Calpurnia said, "There goes the meanest man God ever blew breath into." The neighborhood thought maybe Boo would come out, but his older brother Nathan moved in, and he was just as mean. Atticus didn't like us to talk about the Radleys much, but the more we told Dill about the Radleys, the more he wanted to know. He would stand there hugging the light pole. "Wonder what he does in there," he would murmur. "Wonder what he looks like." Jem said Boo was 6.5 feet tall, ate squirrels and cats. His teeth were yellow, and he drooled most of the time. "Let's try to make him come out," said Dill. Dill bet Jim to go up and knock on the door. Jim thought about it for 3 days. "You're scared," Dill said. "Ain't scared, just trying to be respectful," Jim said. 3 days later, after Dill had taunted him and called him scared repeatedly, Jim finally gave in. He walked slowly to the Radley yard, threw open the gate, sped to the house, slapped it with his hand, and sprinted back to us. When we were safe on our porch, we looked back at the old droopy house. We thought we saw a slight movement inside. Chapter 2. I was really looking forward to starting school. I was going into the first grade. Finally. Atticus made Jim take me to school on the first day. I think Atticus even gave him some money as a bribe to let me tag along, because I heard a jingle in Jim's pockets on the way. Jim told me that during school I wasn't supposed to bother him. We couldn't play together because it would embarrass him since he was in 5th grade. My teacher's name was Miss Caroline Fisher. She was 21 years old and very pretty. She had bright auburn hair, pink cheeks, and wore crimson fingernail polish. Miss Caroline was from Winston County, which is in northern Alabama. She read us a story about cats on the first day. The cats had long conversations with one another. They wore cunning little clothes and lived in a warm house beneath a kitchen stove. By the time Mrs. Cat called the drugstore for an order of chocolate malted mice, the class was wriggling in their seats. They thought the story was too immature for them. My classmates and I were very mature in a way because even though they are young, they had to chop cotton and feed hogs since they were very little. Mrs. Caroline Fisher found out that I could already read, and this upset her. She wanted to teach me to read herself, I guess, and I think it disappointed her that I already knew how. So she got mad at me. How ridiculous. She told me that my father, Atticus, should not teach me any more because he would do it all wrong. But I told her that he didn't teach me. So Miss Caroline said, "Let's not let our imaginations run away with us, dear. Now you tell your father not to teach you any more. It's best to begin reading with a fresh mind. You tell him I'll take over from here and try to undo the damage. Your father does not know how to teach." I guess I picked up reading from sitting in my father's lap each night while he read the newspaper out loud and followed along underneath the words with his finger. Miss Caroline also got mad at me for knowing how to write. Calpurnia was to blame for that. On rainy days she would have me sit and copy out a chapter of the Bible. When lunchtime rolled around on first day of school, Miss Caroline noticed that the Walter Cunningham had no lunch. She tried to loan him a quarter to buy lunch, but he was very embarrassed and kept saying no. The class expected me to explain the situation to Miss Caroline, so I did. When I stood up, she asked, "What is it, Jean Louise?" I replied, "Miss Caroline, he's a Cunningham." But she didn't understand what I meant. What I was trying to tell her was that the Cunninghams were very poor farmers, but they never took charity. They never took anything they couldn't pay back. And since Walter couldn't pay Miss Caroline back, he wouldn't take her money. I remember one time when Miss Atticus did some legal work for Mr. Walter Cunningham's father, whose name is also Walter. Mr. Cunningham paid my father back not with money, but with a load of wood and a sack of hickory nuts. Miss Caroline didn't understand me, though. She thought I was being rude and making jokes, so she told me to hold out my hand. I thought she was going to spit in my hand because in Maycomb kids spit in each other's hands to seal a promise. But instead, she patted my hand 12 times with a ruler. All the kids started laughing when they realized that Mrs. Caroline thought she was whipping me. Most kids were used to being really whipped if they got in trouble, not patted lightly with a ruler. She sent me to the corner until the bell rang for lunch. As I left, I saw Miss Caroline bury her head in her arms because she was having a hard first day. She doesn't understand the way we do things here in Maycomb, and she doesn't understand how poor some of the kids are. I would have felt sorry for her if she had not been so mean to me. She was a pretty little thing.